I grew up in South Africa and have some idea of the context of Nadine Gordimer's work and where she fits in terms of South African writing. Nadine Gordimer is interesting. She was born in 1923 in South Africa. Her parents were Lithuanian Jews, which is very common in South Africa. It's a very big Jewish community, mostly a very large amount from Lithuanian extraction. And that plays a big role in her work. She grows up in 1923 in a small town near Johannesburg. She goes to a convent when she's a kid. So you have these multiple levels of being an outsider in that she's English-speaking in a predominantly Afrikaans milieu. She's Jewish in a Catholic school. She's white in a predominantly black country. But she's privileged because she's white. But she identifies with the oppressed in South Africa, becomes a very important author under the apartheid regime, and an oppositional author. Some of her works get banned. But what's interesting is one of the big themes in her work is this kind of this outsider-insider dichotomy, which comes through in the book between the white insider, if you want, and the immigrant who is Arab. And that really is a theme through most of her work and relates to her status within South African society, where whites in some ways have been privileged, but have also in some ways sometimes been apart. And it's very interesting how the themes of her life in some ways play into her work. Writers in apartheid South Africa were very interesting. Clearly, there were many writers who were quite oppositional to the government. But South Africa was an interesting place in that it wasn't Nazi Germany or Stalinist Russia. Authors were respected mostly. Very few authors were banned outright in the sense that their work might have been restricted somewhat, but they weren't, put in jail. Very few went into exile. So there was always a strong oppositional writing within South Africa. Not only white writers, but black writers. Nadine Gordimer was one of the most prominent amongst them. But writers played a very important role in terms of framing the opposition, particularly outside of South Africa, to the apartheid policy. What's interesting with Gordimer, I think, is that she was one of the more outspoken supporters of the African National Congress. So she was not really part of the liberal white left. She was much more associated with the black opposition to South Africa. But she lived a normal life in South Africa as this years of her contradictions. As an upper middle class white person, she was privileged at the same time as she was in some ways oppressed.